The first rule of guarding Princess Cerelia was simple. Never enter a sealed royal chamber without invitation. The second rule was simpler. Never mistake her voice for weakness. Lieutenant Noah Reed knew both rules, and had been warned by 6 different officials that one human mistake could trigger an interstellar scandal. Yet at midnight, when he heard the princess crying behind the silver nursery door, he broke the first rule so fast, the lock barely finished protesting, because humans are strange creatures. They can ignore insults, threats, and bureaucracy, but not the sound of someone trying to suffer quietly. He opened the door and found no princess. Only a dark room filled with abandoned toys, a cradle draped in mourning silk, and a recording crystal pulsing on the floor. Her sobs came from it, soft, precise, unbearable. Noah understood the trap 1 heartbeat too late. The nursery door slammed behind him, the walls lit with security glyphs, and palace alarms began screaming that the human guard had entered a forbidden memorial chamber. Cerelia would be weakened, the Regency Council would gain power, and Noah would be executed or traded away as a diplomatic apology. Then the floor beneath the cradle opened, and the wrong door became the only right one. Noah dropped flat as a needle drone burst from the hidden shaft, its tiny wings whispering death toward the bed of silk where a child had once slept. He smashed it with his boot, then froze. Because the shaft carried warm air, oil scent, and distant voices, the nursery had not been chosen for scandal alone. It was built above an old servant tunnel that led toward the princess's private rooms. Someone had used her dead sister's chamber to hide an assassination route, and the crying recording was bait, not merely for him, but for every guard honorable enough to rush in and be blamed. Noah had 2 choices: stay trapped and defend his reputation, or climb into the dark and defend the princess. He did not hesitate. Reputation was what people argued over after someone survived. He tore the mourning silk into strips, wrapped one around his bleeding palm, and lowered himself into the shaft. The tunnel was built for smaller bodies, forcing him to crawl through dust thick enough to taste. Above him, the palace thundered with boots, all running the wrong direction, his bead filled with accusations, commands, threats, and one cold order to surrender. Noah muted it and followed the killers. That was the night the palace learned. A human who ignores protocol is not always undisciplined. Sometimes he is early. Princess Cerelia was not crying in her chamber. She was standing before a mirror in battle robes, speaking to ministers through a hollow veil while pretending the failed northern negotiations had not broken her heart. She heard the first faint scrape behind the wall and reached for the ceremonial dagger she was not supposed to carry. The panel exploded inward. 3 masked conspirators entered with silence fields, palace uniforms and blades blackened to swallow light. They expected a sheltered royal, perhaps a scream, perhaps a symbolic struggle. Instead, Cerelia cut the first attacker across the wrist, kicked over a lamp, and shouted for guards who could not hear. Noah came through the wall behind them like a landslide in uniform. He hit the nearest assassin with his shoulder, driving both of them into a wardrobe hard enough to splinter pearlwood. The second turned, blade flashing, and Noah took the cut across his ribs because the line behind him led to Cerelia's throat. He grabbed the assassin's mask, slammed the face into the mirror, and used the broken frame as cover against a dart fired from the third attacker's sleeve. Cerelia stared for half a second at the impossible fact of him, dust-covered, bleeding, accused over every palace channel, and still exactly where danger needed him to be. Then she moved with him. They fought in the ruined chamber as strangers forced into trust. Noah using elbows, furniture, and brutal earth close-quarters training. Cerelia using court dancer footwork, turned sharp by desperation. The last assassin retreated toward the tunnel, trying to trigger the silence field collapse that would erase evidence and bury Noah inside the wall. Cerelia saw the device first, but Noah was closer. He hurled himself at the attacker, caught the assassin around the waist, and both men vanished through the panel. There was a flash, a sound like stone swallowing thunder, and the wall collapsed for one terrible breath. Cerelia believed she had watched the human die for a princess who had barely learned his name. She ordered the wall torn open with her own hands before engineers arrived. ignoring ministers who begged her to consider appearances. When they pulled Noah free, he was alive under broken stone. One arm locked around the assassin, the other holding a data spike torn from the killer's armor. "Proof," he rasped, then tried to pass out with professional dignity. Sorelia knelt beside him, pressed her sleeve against his wound, and said the entire palace believed he had desecrated the nursery. Noah blinked through dust and pain, then said, "I did open the wrong door, Your Highness, but it had the right tunnel." The data spike named 12 conspirators, including the counselor who had ordered Noah's arrest while the assassination was happening. By sunrise, those nobles stood chained beneath the same nursery ceiling they had tried to turn into a weapon. Sorelia entered the chamber not as a grieving girl, not as a trembling heir, but as a ruler with ash on her hands and a human guard walking wounded at her side. She played the recording of her own borrowed sobs for the court, then asked how many of them had heard pain and chosen politics before compassion. No one answered. No one expected dismissal, maybe a medal delivered quietly, maybe a polite exile before his presence became embarrassing. Instead, Sorelia opened the nursery windows for the first time in years. Letting Dawn touch the cradle, she told him her sister had died in the first palace coup. She had kept the room sealed because grief made a shrine out of guilt. Noah stood awkwardly, bruised and bandaged, unsure what humans were supposed to say to alien royalty beside a dead child's cradle. Finally, he said, "I am sorry I broke in." Sorelia looked at the hidden tunnel, the shattered wall, and the mourning beyond it, then shook her head. "No, Lieutenant Reed," she said. "You broke through,